Well, I want to welcome all of you here this morning, and very, very glad to have all of you, especially who are visiting. And I know some of you came to be with your parents and be with your grandparents, and we're very, very glad to have you here. This morning, I want to talk a little bit about being a daddy. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a minister in the Dallas-Fort Worth area this week. And I was telling him, I said, I'm going to talk Sunday morning about being a daddy. But I said to him, I said, I'm really wrestling with this. And I don't know quite what to do with this. And he said, well, what are you thinking? And I said, well, he said, on the one hand, I can just name off a number of daddies that I know who I'm just so proud of, and I see what they're trying to do with their kids, and I see what they're teaching their children by their example and words. I said, I'm so encouraged by that. And then I said, there are some others I just don't get. I don't get these guys. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't get these guys. And I was telling him, I said, Grady, I do not know how to speak to both of these people at one time in a few minutes. A few minutes, that's the important one, Don. A few minutes. And so what I've decided to do is normally on Sunday morning, I would rather work with a text and just do some things out of that. Not going to do that this morning. I'm going to read a few texts in a minute, and I'm just going to talk to you, and I'm going to tell you what's on my heart, and I'm praying that God will do something with all of that, and hopefully this morning will be very, very affirming to some of you and convicting to others of you, and let God sort all that out. There was a guy by the name of James Boswell. Boswell, born I think in 1740. He was a writer and a thinker, and kind of noted for a book he wrote entitled The Life of Samuel Rutherford, Samuel Johnson. In fact, he was known as, this biography of Samuel Johnson was known as one of the finest biographies that's ever been written in the English language. Boswell had a very difficult childhood. He struggled with extreme timidity and wrestled with the night fears, and also struggled with depression as a child. Boswell when he would give talks to different groups, he often spoke about one day in his growing up years, one day when he was with his daddy, and it just meant the world to him. His daddy took him fishing. And Boswell said, on that day when I went fishing with my daddy, we had a talk, and I learned so much that I continue to use and think about even as an adult. Well, different groups of people heard Boswell continue to refer to this moment in his childhood when he went fishing with his daddy, when he apparently learned so much. And finally, one reader said, I'm going to look at Boswell's daddy's journals. I'm going to find that day and see what his father entered. His father was long deceased, as I recall. And anyway, he was going to look at Boswell's father's journal. And sure enough, on that day, he found a one-line entry in that journal on the day that meant so much to his son. And here was what the father wrote. Went fishing today with my son. A day wasted. And I thought, boy, there's father and son just passing one another in the night. Son looks at that day as one of the greatest moments of his life. Father felt like he had wasted his time. I'm convinced that the most important work that fathers do are in ordinary days. Have you noticed this group over here? They're getting younger and younger, it seems. Not really. But they keep changing. I mean, this is the most beautiful group, but they're different every year. Did you know that the little kids are grown up now and they're over here? It happens so fast. Do some of you remember you look back at rearing your children who are now adults and you think, man, what happened? It just took off. Now, if you've got a toddler, or if you've got a baby that's been screaming through the night, you don't get this. Last night seemed like months. But I'm just telling you, overall, parents, isn't this true? You guys that have reared your kids, when you look back and you think, man, what happened? How did that go by so quickly? So, what I want to do for a moment is for us to think about what does it mean to be an effective father used by God in the ordinary moments of life. In the ordinary moments. And I want you to be encouraged where you need to be encouraged and be convicted where you need to be convicted. And this is coming from a guy who's made plenty of mistakes. In fact, I sent an email to one of our kids yesterday after lunch, and here was the first line. I think I owe you an apology. Now, I wasn't planning on doing that. You just make enough mistakes, you can coincide with sermons pretty quickly. But I get the imperfect father thing, okay? I'm there with you. Not talking about perfection or imperfection or being a good daddy or a bad daddy. We're talking about what it means to be effective in the ordinary course of life. Now, we don't have anything up on the screen here, but I think you may have something on your order of worship if you want to flip to the back side of that. I thought this week about some things that have been helpful to me. And here's number one. Effective fathers have a faith of their own. Effective fathers have a faith of their own. And this is where I'd like to read from the Bible, in the book of Ephesians, beginning chapter 5. Now wait a moment while you turn there. Chapter 5. We'll begin reading with verse 1. Now, you guys that are not married but think one day you might like to be married, I really encourage you to pay attention to this. Do not marry some guy that will be... when you think about getting married, I'm talking while you turn to Ephesians 5. I hope you're turning there. When you think about getting married to somebody, keep in mind, do I want this person to be the daddy to my children? That is huge. Marriage is for grown-ups, and having children is for grown-ups. It's not for little kids. Okay? And enough of that. Ephesians 5, verse 1. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children. And live a life of love just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Be imitators of the Father. Be imitators of God as dearly loved children. And we hear that? Who is the one perfect Father? It's God. The one perfect Father is our God. And he says, I want you to be imitators of your Father. Now, as this spills over into families, guys, guess what your kids are doing? They're imitating you. The things you would like for them to imitate, the things you would not like for them to imitate, they're imitating you. That's just part of the deal, isn't it? Chapter 5, verse 21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And Paul begins to unpack, what does it mean to be children of God with male and female, with husbands and wives? What does it mean to live in mutual submission toward one another? What does that mean? How does a wife yield to her husband, and how does a husband yield to his wife? How does a wife serve her husband? How does a husband serve his wife? Well, finally, chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Now, this is not the text that you pull out and read to your children and say, hey, see here, you're supposed to obey us. This is a reminder to all of us as parents that I am doing my child no favor when I'm failing to train him to obey me. When I allow disrespect and backtalk and disobedience to reign in my home, mother or father, I'm doing them no favor, because this is where they learn to obey God. And if they don't learn to obey you, they don't learn to obey God. And he says, don't exasperate those kids. Why? Because your Heavenly Father, He's not about exasperating you. Have you noticed that about God? He's not trying to frustrate you. Well, instead, bring them up in the training and instruction. Bring them up. Bring the kids up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, effective fathers have a faith of their own. Effective fathers do not say, your mother knows the Bible better than me. Go ask her. Effective fathers are not people who piggyback off their wife's faith. Effective fathers have a faith of their own. Second, effective fathers teach what they want passed on. Now, I want to kind of flesh this out a little bit. Bill Petty read an important scripture a moment ago, Deuteronomy chapter 6, where basically God is telling the people of God, you be very intentional about what you teach your children. In fact, I want you to teach them the commandments. Teach them my ways. Now, those commandments are rooted in the grace of God and the action of God. Okay, that comes first. But people, kids and adults, need instruction on how to be a witness to the world and before one another and reflect who God is. Okay. That's true. But let me tell you this. Whether we think about what we're teaching or not, we are teaching something. We are teaching something. And so, I might come back as a father and I might say, I need to teach my kids the Bible. I need to teach my kids basic moral values. I need to teach my kids what's really important. One of the questions I'm going to have to ask if I'm there is, so what am I going to do then with what I'm already teaching? You say, my kids don't know what is important to me. Oh, yes, they do. They know what's important to their mothers and daddies. They know that. I'm telling you, one of the most humbling realities of rearing kids for me, I couldn't hide anything. Sometimes my moodiness and sometimes my goofy immaturity, it's right there on display, right there in the house. What's wrong, Dad? Nothing. Dad, we know you. Yes, you do. I mean, you can't hide any of that stuff. I just don't want to talk. Dad's in a bad mood. I'm not in a bad mood. Dad, You can't get this morning. You are teaching already right now something. You're teaching something. The question is not, do I need to start teaching some other things? The question is, could it be that my values and priorities are so wrong that I need to back up and rearrange my own life? Yes, I need to be intentional about teaching the ways of the Lord. But it is so confusing when I'm doing that while my children see through my actions and words that I'm teaching something else. Now that's humbling, isn't it? That might be worth thinking about. Number 3, effective fathers grasp that their actions will either trump or complement their words. Effective fathers grasp that their actions will either trump or complement their words. When we started, Charlotte and I started dating one another, and I used to go to her house. I watched those people. She had these brothers and had a younger sister, younger brother at home, then had a brother away at college. And I watched her daddy. I watched her mother. Her daddy was a minister, and so I'd heard him preach. I'd heard him talk about things that he said were important to him, but I wanted to see what his life was like. And I used to hear in sermons, his daddy would occasionally refer to, her daddy would occasionally refer to his wife, and I knew he said he loved her, but I wanted to see what that was like up close. And boy, did I. And I was learning. Charlotte and I were headed toward marriage. Now, some of you may have known what you were doing when you got married. I didn't have a clue. Much less be a daddy. I didn't have a clue what a married guy did. And I was watching her daddy and the way he would treat his wife. There was something about the way he elevated her. Now, I'm not talking about in public settings. I'm talking about at the house. There was something about the way he talked with her that communicated that she was very precious. Here's what I'm telling you. Listen to this very closely. I heard him say with his mouth that he loved his wife. His actions complemented those words. His mouth said, I love you. His actions really emphasized that. Your actions will do that as a husband and father. They will complement your words. If you're daddy, your kids, they know exactly where mama stands in your eyes. Not just because of what you say, but the way you act. Actions have a way of complementing words. Here's a father that talks about the need to be generous. We just need to be generous. Generous with our time, generous with our money, generous with time, money, talents. He does that one day in a little talk. And they notice at home that when a relative is sick, their daddy's the first one to give some money. They notice that when a bunch of people are gathered together and they're pooling their money, to eat together one night, their daddy is the one that makes sure that nobody came up short. Their daddy is the one that makes sure that nobody came up short. Here's a little extra that'll help. Their daddy talks about generosity, but his words complement those actions. His actions complement those words. On the other hand, here's a daddy who says, I want you always be truthful, always be honest, don't lie. And here you are in line with the family at the amusement park. Do you know what it takes to get in those places? My goodness, that's expensive now. It's a lot of money. And you're we're in the line. And here's this sign, 12 and under, over 12, your tickets for over 12. Well, that costs you as much as an adult. Under 12. Wow, what a discount. You going through that line, and you see your daddy say, got one under 12. You look at your daddy, and you walk through, and you say, Daddy, I'm not under 12. He said, well, that's too much money. We got to allow enough to eat. His actions just trumped what he had been teaching. You say, well, kids know that I think truth is important. Sorry, you just trumped that deal. You need to be respectful to your mother. No talking back. Treat her special. And then here we are in the kitchen, and some little guy smarts off to his mother, and Dad laughs. His actions just trumped what he had been saying. And guys, I want to tell you, this is the good news in this. When you talk about making a difference with your kids, in the Spirit of the Lord, just start living some of this out, and I'm telling you, it'll stick. They will remember as they see you, as they see action next to those words. Does that make any sense? And finally, effective fathers give themselves. They give themselves. Somebody was telling me recently of a school program. I think it was in the cafeteria at one of the elementary schools. School program. And it was one of those deals, where the kids get up and they do things and sing and I don't know. Kind of one of those deals where they got every child doing something. That's a good thing. The teacher told me, he said, I looked out at all these parents and the kids. And the kids were leaning in watching, and the parents were texting. All these parents on their phones. Effective fathers think about when is the time to text or get on the iPad or whatever, and when is the time to be physically and emotionally present. Effective fathers think through what are the most important times in my child's life during the ordinary day. For instance, when smaller children are about to go to bed. Is this a time where I need to be engaged completely and not checking a screen? Hear me, I'm not knocking technology at all. I'm talking about is the discipline to think through. How can I really be fully present and give myself to my children completely without distractions? And can I think through times where that needs to happen and then other times where I need to be looking at screens? Does that make any sense? Okay? Just asking you to think through this. You make the decisions, but think through it. Now, I want to talk to you for a moment about what effective fathers need. Number one, effective fathers need forgiveness. If you've one thing that ought to be happening in a Christian family, in a family where we claim to honor Jesus and where we believe that He has come to redeem the creation and redeem us, we ought to have something in our families that says, no fair throwing failures and sins back in my face. No fair. Parents should not do that to children, and children should not do that to parents, and mom and dad should not do that to one another. You never do take out the trash. For the last 40 weeks, you have not taken out the trash. Just, deal with it now, but don't start dragging it out of the garbage can. Sometimes, we're called to forgive. It is not for children to be hanging these failures over their parents' heads. Your father is imperfect. He is imperfect. Mothers are imperfect. Children are imperfect. Well, you say, well, there's just some things they haven't done that were right. That's exactly right. And fathers need to be forgiven. But second, fathers need encouragement. And I want just a word here to all of you who are grandparents. I don't care if you're grandchildren, if you may not have children or grandchildren in this congregation, but if you're a grandparent, hear this. You are in a time of life right now where you are primed to be an encouragement to young parents. And since this is Father's Day, I'm going to say particularly to young fathers. So, grandfathers, listen to this. When you notice these young fathers doing something right, step into the game. Say something. Here comes this little kid running, after church one day. He's running down the middle aisle. Of course, we got folks on walkers, and we got folks that have just had surgery, and you don't need to be running through here like you're powered by a missile, And Daddy comes and Daddy's talking, but Daddy sees this little jet coming down, and Daddy looks at that child, and Daddy does not continue to talk or look away. He looks at that child until child slows down and we're just not having that. And so here you are, a grandpa, and you saw that, and you come over to that young daddy who's just trying to figure it out, and you say, son, that's good. That was real good. I wish I had learned how to do that when I was as young as you. Do you know that would mean the world to some of these young guys? You hear that a young man has just gotten a new job, and you just come up to him at church one day and put your arm around him and say, do you know I prayed for you every day this week starting that new job? How'd it go? One day you're back here talking with some of your friends. Again, I'm talking to grandmas and grandpas, but particularly grandpas. You're talking with some of your friends, and you see a couple of women here talking, and a husband comes in, and he's kind of ready to go, but he sees that his wife is talking to her friend, and he looks at her and he says, you just take your time. We're fine. And you come up to him a little later and you say, oh, that's good. Your wife needs to have friends, and she needs to be able to talk. That's so mature the way you handled that. Grandmas and grandpas, you need to get in the game and help with this. And I'm telling you, if you want to be used, the Lord will open opportunities for you. You're going to find things happening right in front of you that you can encourage. I am begging you to please think about this and pray about this. Well, finally, I just want to give you a charge, and we'll stop. As daddies, number one, I want to encourage you to be immediate. Be immediate in being a father. Be immediate. You can choose to pay now or pay later. Pay now or pay later. And I don't know what that means for you as a dad. It may mean, I need to start really praying for my family. For some of you, it just means I need to get in church again. I need to be here on Sunday mornings again instead of, being in and out and in and out. I need to be here. I need to set an example before my family and my kids. I need to get in the game myself. I need to get engaged. But here's what I'm asking. Do it now. Be immediate. Pay now or pay later. You can close your eyes and laugh at a smart aleck 4-year-old. I'm telling you, it's much more complicated when they're 14. Or 24 and out of complete control. We were at a couple's house one night. Our little kids were little. And one of them, and I've got her face in mind, but I don't think I'll say her name. One of them just kind of smarted off to Mama. Well, you know what it's like when you're with friends and one of them smarts off like that? It's embarrassing. And so Charlotte kind of giggled, and she would, I'm telling you, she's in Alabama, but she's very good with me telling this story. She kind of giggled, and I kind of followed her, kind of giggled too. The guy, the husband, he's a little older than us. He's kind of quiet for a minute. And he said, you know, there may come a time when that's not funny anymore. We got in the car and said, he was right, wasn't he? We're laughing at things we shouldn't. We were laughing because we were thinking about us, not what that child needed. Boy, that was helpful to us. Be immediate. Number two, be deliberate. Be deliberate. We got lots of folks involved in athletics. Others are involved in play practice. Others involved in music. Imagine going to play practice. There you are, going to play practice. And you get there, and you're there as one of the participants. You're there, and the director of the play says, well, I'm not sure what we're going to do. Not sure what we're going to do. And she just kind of looks totally disorganized. She kind of ambles around and just kind of, well, why don't we just do this? And you're going, man, what is this deal? You go to football practice. Coaches are just standing around. Well, we hadn't really thought much about this practice, but I don't know. Why don't we run a little while? You're thinking, what? Fathers need to be deliberate. Deliberate. I wish there was a way to have a giant, some geeky guy will think of this, or geeky woman will think of this, but I wish there was a way to have some giant clock come through and just hear this ticking sound. I am telling you, it's moving along. Your kids are growing up, or they've already grown up. Be deliberate. Be intentional. Step up. If what you need to do is start getting the family back to the table again and praying and having one meal together, make that first step. If what you need to do is say, we got to have some time every evening where we're going to be screen free and eyeball to eyeball. We're going to have real conversations and not glancing at plastic. We're going to do that. Well, then do that. But do something. Be deliberate. And then finally, here's a third one. Be real. Be real. Boy, guys, this is just something I've had to wrestle with. Some of y'all remember when our kids were little, and wherever we sat, right over here, I guess, and they were here every Sunday. Let me tell you what that's like for me. I not only have a wife and 2 children listening to every word, but they know if I'm being real or not. Now, of course, we know that the most important thing in life is God first and Jesus second. And then they've experienced all week a self-centered dad. So what is it? See, I can't put on these churchy words on Sunday, and then the rest of the week the family knows who I am. I want to be real. I want to say, guys, I know, family, I know, you know where my priorities are. You know who I am. I have got to make some changes, and I got to do it immediately. If I could just say this, far too many dads are just bystanders. They're sitting off in the shadows in some recliner. As one dad told me a long time ago, that horse got out of the barn a long time ago talking about his little kids. And a lot of it was his own passivity. You may not know what to do as a father, and boy, I'm with you if you're there. Still with you with these adult children. But one thing you can do is just step up and say, you know, I'm not sure what to do, but I'm ready to take one step forward. Is there somebody here who can help me know what to do? Moss Hart was a New York playwright. A lot of his musicals he interpreted were on Broadway. Born in 1904, grew up in poverty in New York City. Spent a lot of time in Brooklyn and the Bronx and some time in Manhattan. Hart wrote a book several years ago entitled Act One, his autobiography. I came across this line, first of this autobiography. He tells the story of when he was a boy, and again, they lived in virtual poverty. But his aunt had come to live with them. And his aunt evidently had a little more money than the Hart family had, because she would buy, at Christmas time, she would buy a Christmas tree, and she would buy presents for the children. Well, the aunt and Hart's mom and dad had a falling out, and she ended up moving. Hart writes, "It was the Christmas after my aunt had left the house. And since it was she who always supplied the tree and the presents for my brother and myself, this first Christmas without her was a bleak and empty one. I remember that I was more or less reconciled to it because my father had worked only spasmodically throughout the year. He goes on to talk about how they owed the butcher and they owed the supermarket person, and he says my mother would walk 10 and 15 blocks to get a gallon of milk because she needed to buy from someone who she hadn't done business with because she owed everybody. He says, obviously, Christmas that year was out of the question. We were barely staying alive. On Christmas Eve, my father was very silent during the evening meal. Then he surprised and startled me by turning to me and saying, 'Let's take a walk.' He had never suggested such a thing before. And moreover, it was a very cold winter's night. I was even more surprised when he said as we left the house, 'Let's go down to 149th and Westchester.' Oh, that was where the Christmas pushcarts were. And my heart leapt within me. It was Christmas time, and the pushcarts would be full of toys packed end to end for blocks at a stretch. On other Christmas Eves, I had gone there with my aunt, and from our tour of the cart, she had gathered what I wanted the most. My father knew this, of course, and so I joyously concluded one thing. My father was going to buy me a Christmas present. On the walk down, I was beside myself with delight and an inner relief. It had been a bad year for me, the year of my aunt's going, and I wanted a Christmas present terribly. Not a present merely. I wanted some sign from my father or mother that they knew what I was going through and they cared for me as much as my aunt and my grandfather cared for me. The idea that my father had managed a Christmas present for me in spite of everything filled me with peace and lightness of heart that I hadn't known in months. And so we hurried on, our heads bent against the wind, to the cluster of lights ahead that was 149th and Westchester Avenue. And those lights seemed to me to be the brightest lights I'd ever seen. Tugging at my father's coat, I started down the line of pushcarts. There were all kinds of things I wanted. But since nothing had been said by my father about buying a present, I would merely pause before a pushcart to say, with as much control as I could muster, "Look at that chemistry set. Look at that printing press." Each time my father would pause and he would ask the pushcart man the price. Once or twice, he would pick up a toy of some kind and look at it and look at me, as if to say, maybe this would be something that I would like. But I was 10 years old. I wanted a chemistry set. I wanted a printing press. Finally, it got near the end of the line. There were only 2 or 3 push carts remaining. My father began to jingle coins in his pocket and then pulled out 75 cents. 75 cents to buy me a Christmas present. He hadn't dared say so up till now in case there wasn't a present to be had for such a small sum. And then he concludes this. As I looked up at him, I saw a look of despair and disappointment in his eyes that brought me closer to him than I had ever been in my life. I wanted to throw my arms around him and say, "It doesn't matter. I understand. This is better than a chemistry set or a printing press. I love you, Daddy." But instead, we stood shivering beside each other for a moment, and then turned away from the last 2 push carts and started walking silently back home. I didn't take his hand, nor did he take mine. We were not on that basis. Nor did I ever tell him how close I felt to him that night. That for a little while, the concrete between father and son had crumbled away, and I knew that we were 2 lonely people struggling together in the winter's night. Hart said that many years later, his father, when he was 91, was living in Florida. Hart flew to Florida to see him. His father was very ill, being cared for by a nurse. Hart said that he sat on the couch with his father and began flipping through a photograph album showing his father pictures of the family. And then he said, as they sat together, he felt his father's hand slip inside his. He said, several years ago or even months ago, I probably would have pulled my hand away, but I just let it be still. He goes on to say, my dad was 91, and this is the first time we had touched. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to some of your sons or daughters. I don't know. On the other hand, I rejoice with some of you, with your sons or daughters. And they're bringing you a lot of delight right now. Others of you have not experienced that yet. In the meantime, faces keep changing in this room. Look at them over here. My goodness. And the daddies sit here, and the mothers sit here. And the question we've got to ask is, what are we going to do with this moment? And the moment to begin making a difference as an effective father or as an effective mother is right now. Right now. As we're deliberate about what we do. The good news is the grace of God is larger than any failures you've ever made as a mother or daddy. Do not let the evil one tie you up in that. That is a dead-end street. The grace of God is larger than any failures you've ever made as a mother or daddy. The grace of God is larger than any failures you've ever made as a son or a daughter. But the good news is the presence of the Lord is with us. It is not too late to be used by God to make a difference. Make a difference with your adult children. Make a difference with your babies. Make a difference with your toddlers. Make a difference with your high school kids. Make a difference with somebody else's kids. Make a difference by encouraging some young father, some young mother. Y'all been very patient. I appreciate that. This is just something I've been thinking about for a while and wanted to share with you. I really, really believe. I honestly believe this about every person here. Through the presence of God, we can take one step in the right direction. How about that? Why don't we sing for a moment? Some of our shepherds will be at the back and some will be at the front. Maybe this morning, you just want to ask somebody to pray for your family. Pray for your son. Pray for your daughter. Pray for just the whole bunch. And I encourage you to go to these elders, these shepherds, and they'll just quietly pray for you as we sing. I want to encourage you, be thinking about what the Lord wants you to do with this. What the Lord wants you to do with this. Why don't we sing together?
There's a fountain free just for you and me.